You know you love the story so far. Like and subscribe.
Chapter 23, The Unseen Hand. Frey and Kess stood waiting for me as I stepped back into the building. Their expressions held a tinge of concern and curiosity. "They'll return," I stated. "The federal government has taken an interest in our activities." I swept my gaze around but didn't see Shay as I'd hoped. Anticipating my question, Frey offered, "She is in the diplomatic conference room." I nodded once and gestured for them to follow. Her anger was palpable. I couldn't fault her, as I had embarrassed her. Shay sat at the long, oval table with holographic images of Trin Hez in the center and Hamble to her right. Everyone's expressions remained neutral as I settled into the seat beside Shay. Kess and Frey sat to my left. "Good morning," I began in greeting. "The United States government has suddenly taken an interest in our activities here." "Are my people at risk?" interjected Trin Hez irritably. "Our people have been operating on an alien planet with a developing population," I countered dryly. "We have been at risk since we decided to come here." Trin Hess's ears dipped in annoyance, but otherwise remained quiet. "They want access to the base and will undoubtedly return with a warrant from the government ordering us to allow them access. They will not be alone when they do." "Why not allow them access?" offered Hamble. Every head turned toward him as he glanced away from the meeting to listen to someone outside the communication sensor. He nodded once and returned his attention to us. "We currently have enough trained staff to give the appearance of a wholly human-ran facility. The infrastructure is also vast enough to hide our Krathen friends from unwanted attention by locking down the restricted areas." "There is a ship the size of a small town docked in the hangar," Kess pointed out, as if it should be obvious to everyone in attendance. "Is there any chance of launching without detection?" inquired Fraser. Hamble seemed to consider the option for a long minute before shaking his head. "No, they are undoubtedly watching the facility." "Let them see it," offered Shay. Every head turned to her with a mixture of stunned silence or confusion. She glanced at me briefly before continuing. "We are a space research facility. Everything here is designed around that endeavor." "What if they want to see the spaceship?" challenged Trin Hez. "It is a sterile room," I offered. "We cannot allow anyone inside due to the risk of contamination." "And if they decide to force their way in?" pressed Trin Hez. "There is nothing on Earth short of a nuclear blast that could force the doors," Frey countered. Trin Hez considered the response before adding, "I insist our people be on that ship in case we have to evacuate." His tone carried the authority of someone who would not be persuaded otherwise. The Krathen on the planet were under his command, and thus he could order anything he wanted when it came to Krathen personnel and assets. I bowed and inclined my head slightly in submission. "The safety of everyone is our top priority," I assured him. Trin Hez said nothing more before he cut the connection. I turned to Hamble. "I need your team to rejoin us today." "Yes, sir." His connection dropped as well with a circling motion of his hand in the air. It would still be several hours before he could make it back, even with our advanced avionics. Kess and Frey stood to leave as well. "We will begin scrubbing our tech and getting our people to the ship," announced Frey unceremoniously. Once Shay and I were alone in the room, I turned to her. "I owe you an apology," I said softly with all the sincerity I could manage. It was not a difficult task. I had most of the day to consider my actions and how they affected my family. "I did not mean to embarrass you." Shay's ears swiveled back and forth like a radar dish, parsing what I was saying. I did not think she would respond for the longest time. "I understand your anger," she said at last. "But we need the military, and as long as we remain useful, we will have their support." I nodded slowly, acknowledging her logic despite my reservations. "I agree," I answered grudgingly. I took her hand and lifted it to my lips and kissed it before pressing my face against the back of it affectionately. I was afraid I had messed things up for us. "We are one," she answered. I opened my eyes to match her intense gaze. "You are mine," she growled. "And you are mine," I echoed. The sterilization process took 2 days. By the time it was complete, there was little to hint that anything other than human technology existed. Every Krathen script was removed from the walls and even the computers. The algorithms were still present but buried deep behind advanced firewalls and protocols requiring command authority to unlock. Access to the main hangar was also locked behind biometric security, well beyond modern human capability to break. To open it from outside the hangar required two sets of signatures, and both had to be accompanied by each species. Hamble and his team had not returned to the base as initially planned. Instead, they were staged at the cabin used to screen new recruits. He would make his entrance once the agents returned to provide a shock factor. Only he would disembark without his helmet, while the rest of his team would be in full tactical armor, both alien and exotic, to lend to the illusion of it all being human design. We did not have to wait much longer. The entire compound jolted awake to the sound of alarms blaring just after sunrise on the fourth day. Shay and I had not been asleep long when the warning came. Shay dressed in her military-grade combat armor, while I calmly pulled on one of my business suits, minus the tie. I shared an affectionate head touch with both Shay and our daughter before I rendezvoused with Chief Markham at the exit of the building. Markham wore denim jeans, boots, and a tan vest covering a white long-sleeve button shirt. Unbeknownst to the casual observer, he also sported two realistic synthetic arms, complete with organic polymer skin. "They have returned with additional agents and the local sheriff," he reported stoically. I followed him to the waiting silver SUV. The agents waited with satisfaction, clearly etched all over their faces, when I stepped out of the vehicle after Markham opened the door. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said with a smile as I approached the gate. "We have a warrant to search the premises," announced the lead agent, holding out a vanilla envelope. I tapped the code on my wrist communicator, and the gates began to slide back just enough to allow them to walk in but still block their vehicles. He walked through and handed me the papers. I did not need to read them, as Gracia had already intercepted the electronic copy and forwarded it to me the previous day. The agents had been thorough in their request, as it granted them the authority to search both the outside and inside of the compound. What it did not specify was the requirement to allow their vehicles onto the property, and I intended to stand on that point. "You are welcome to exercise your warrant, but you cannot bring your vehicles onto my property," I said with a smile, pocketing the warrant. "You will be accompanied everywhere you go." "You are required to open the gates," he ordered. "And I have," I countered pleasantly. "You and your agents are being granted unrestricted access to my property, but you will do so on foot. There is nothing stated about allowing your vehicles into my home." "You are ordered to open the gates to allow our vehicles in," interjected the second agent. I turned and began walking back toward the control center, with Markham gesturing for the agents to follow. I tapped on the hood of the SUV, and the driver inside backed away, turned, and drove back. "Mr. Mitchell, if you do not open the gates, you will be placed under arrest," called the second agent. I did not look back as I continued walking, but shouted over my shoulder instead. "You have no legal right to detain anyone on this property. You can exercise your warrant, or you can leave. I do not care which." I could hear doors open and shut behind me, along with the murmuring of agitated voices. "Mr. Mitchell!" Again, the same voice. "Stop! You are under arrest." I could now hear a dog beginning to bark excitedly. I halted and spun to see the agent hurrying toward me, along with his partner. I tapped my communicator, and the roar of powerful engines reverberated across the property as Hamble and his team burst into the scene just as the two agents seized my arms. I did not resist. I did not need to. The large combat shuttle swept in a loop overhead, kicking up dust in every direction before settling a dozen feet away. The gathered agents stepped back in alarm, and the two holding me lost their grip as they attempted to shield their eyes against the hot, sandy blast of air. Hamble, along with 4 other security personnel, stepped off the ship and approached with detached professional interest. Hamble removed his helmet once the dust had settled, and the ship was providing overwatch. "You have entered a restricted aerospace research facility," he announced calmly. Hands went to weapons at his approach, but he ignored them. "I would not do that," he said, pulling a sealed envelope out of a breast pocket and handing it to the closest agent. "You will receive a call any minute explaining the contents of that. Your warrant has been amended to restrict your access to common areas not related to aerospace research." As if on cue, the lead agent's phone rang. I raised an eyebrow in response but said nothing. "But sir," argued the agent to whoever was on the other end of the phone. He frowned in obvious displeasure. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir." He hung up the phone looking frustrated. "Mr. Mitchell and his staff are not to be touched," he announced. The next 6 hours were filled with questions, demands, and threats. Each challenge was met with cryptic responses, refused demands, and ignored threats. The agents tried to access computer terminals without success and were only allowed into the smaller hangars, but access to the craft within was restricted. Hamble and his team herded agents throughout the compound with professional courtesy, but offered no assistance with accessing any information, nor did they offer anything more than a cursory explanation you would expect of a tour guide within the White House. Dr. Chen offered an expansive, albeit technical, explanation of the medical department and all the equipment, so much so that the agents gave up trying to follow. By the time the agents abandoned their investigation, they were left with more questions than answers, and no more access than the halls that meandered throughout the top 2 floors. Hamble himself had masterfully navigated the agents past the carefully concealed access points to the lower installation. No agent had been able to go anywhere unescorted. The dogs were of no help either. Both canines only tucked their tails and whined when they were led to a door or hatch. One even leaked a puddle when half-dragged to the door housing the spaceship. I turned to Hamble once they were escorted from the facility and were being shepherded back to the gate entrance. "Who was that on the phone?" Hamble smiled. "I imagine the regional head after getting a phone call from one of my contacts at the Pentagon." His humor vanished suddenly, replaced with concern. "I hope you have some technology we can offer the military?" I patted him on the shoulder. "I imagine we can devise something to entice them." The lockdown ended half an hour later, after Shay and I released the security restrictions. Within an hour, everything functioned as it had before the interruption. Any of a dozen high-level personnel could reactivate the lockdown protocols, but only Free and Hamble could lift them outside myself or Shay, and only together. The next 6 months passed without incident. Hamble's team grew, split and grew again, until there were a total of 6 recruitment teams working in the field. The medical department was now beginning to outgrow the current footprint it occupied deep within the facility, and plans were currently underway to construct a new surface facility nestled between Alpine and Marfa. Military and government contracts began coming in once the inertia dampener technology pivoted military aviation and the space industry ahead by several generations. The technology, of course, was already outdated by 100 years by Crathen standards, but it sated the appetite, if only for a short time, of the government. What nobody outside the complex ever saw were the minds behind the advances that continued at a rapidly increasing pace. While science continued on the planet, the implementation took place away from prying eyes within the depths of Io, orbiting quietly around Jupiter. Without visual observations, all images planned for the planet would be corrupted to mask the gaping hole that opened occasionally to allow the coming and going of hybrid craft on their way to the border between Stalath and Crathen territories. Shay and I sat accompanied by Chiari, watching the brilliant stars glide slowly across the night sky. The pristine view was only marred occasionally by a passing satellite that made up the extensive network always watching us now. Only the sophisticated jamming system that enveloped us bounced back images of desolation, broken only by the stored images of dimly lit buildings that lacked any external activity. In reality, the compound was buzzing with alien and human life across the property well away from us. Dr. Simmons informed me that he has started working in collaboration with NASA to establish a base on the moon. I remarked conversationally. "Will it affect our own facilities?" Shay asked without looking at me. Her eyes were still locked on the sky above. "He does not think so," I responded. "We will of course be developing our own mining facilities on the moon to begin training humans to operate in space for increased durations." Epilogue. At the heart of the Crathen-human partnership, Sergeant Mitchell, now with his family, oversaw the rapid advancements taking place away from Earth's prying eyes on Io, one of Jupiter's moons. The facility bustled with activity, a fusion of alien and human life dedicated to building a new future. As they watched the stars from their compound, Mitchell and Shacy reflected on the progress. A human Crathen collaboration with NASA was in motion to establish a base on the moon, and they were developing their own mining facilities there to train humans for extended space operations. Mitchell recognized that his home was no longer a place, but with Shacy and their daughter Chiari, who embodied the bridge between their two species.
Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for Book 2, Void Conflict.